Heavenly Father, I pray for everyone watching this video right now. May you bless them with peace, joy, and breakthroughs in their lives. Amen. Hello, my wonderful family. I am so glad and grateful to have you here with me today. Your support means the world, and I truly don't take it for granted. Before we dive into today's powerful story, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, drop a comment below to share your thoughts, and of course, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update from this channel. Get out! The words hit Sarah Chun like physical blows as she stood in the marble foyer of the Blackwood estate, her suitcase clutched in trembling hands. Her mother-in-law Margaret's voice carried the kind of cold authority that came from a lifetime of getting exactly what she wanted. "Margaret, please." Sarah's voice cracked as she looked desperately toward the staircase where her husband David should have been defending her. "I just need to talk to David. There's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was my son thinking he could bring someone like you into this family." Sarah felt her 5-year marriage crumbling in real time. 3 hours ago, she'd been Mrs. David Blackwood, living in what she'd thought was her home. Now she was being escorted out by security guards while her husband's family watched like she was nothing more than a trespasser who'd overstayed her welcome. "The prenup was very clear," Margaret continued, her designer heels clicking against the imported marble as she circled Sarah like a predator. "Adultery voids all financial agreements. You get nothing. I didn't commit adultery." Sarah's voice was stronger now, fueled by the injustice of the accusation. "I would never. The photographs say otherwise." Margaret held up a manila envelope with the casual satisfaction of someone playing a winning hand. Sarah stared at it, knowing that whatever was inside had been carefully orchestrated to destroy her marriage and her life. "I don't care what those photos appear to show. I've never been unfaithful to David. David seems to think differently." The security guards flanked Sarah, making it clear that her time for explanations had expired. As they guided her toward the door, Sarah caught a glimpse of David standing at the top of the staircase, his face a mask of betrayal and disappointment. "David," Sarah called out, her voice echoing through the cavernous space. "You know me. You know I would never do this. Please, just listen to me for 5 minutes." David turned away without a word. The front door closed behind Sarah with the finality of a tomb sealing shut. She stood on the circular driveway where she'd arrived as a hopeful bride 5 years ago, now holding everything she owned in a single suitcase and facing a future that felt as empty as her bank account. The prenup had been thorough. No alimony, no property claims, no safety net of any kind if the marriage ended due to her misconduct. Sarah had signed it thinking it would never matter because she loved David and would never betray him. Now she understood that the prenup hadn't been about protecting the Blackwood assets from her greed. It had been about ensuring she could be discarded without compensation when she was no longer useful. Sarah walked to the end of the long driveway, her heels clicking against the cobblestones as tears began streaming down her face. She had no car, it had been registered in David's name. No credit cards, they'd been family accounts that were probably already canceled. No friends. The Blackwood social circle had never truly accepted her, and her old friends had drifted away during 5 years of trying to fit into a world that had never wanted her. She had nothing and no one. Sarah sank onto a stone bench beside the estate's entrance gate, finally allowing herself to sob with the kind of raw desperation that came from losing everything at once. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of trying to earn love and acceptance from people who'd apparently been planning her destruction from the beginning. The roar of jet engines cut through her crying like a knife through silk. Sarah looked up, wiping tears from her eyes as she watched a sleek private jet circling overhead before beginning its descent toward what had to be the small private airfield just outside town. The aircraft was impossibly elegant, the kind of luxury that made even the Blackwood family's wealth look modest by comparison. Sarah stared at the jet with the numb fascination of someone whose life had just been destroyed watching other people's fairy tales unfold. Somewhere, someone wealthy enough to own that kind of aircraft was probably flying in to conduct business or attend parties with families like the Blackwoods. People who lived in a world where Sarah had never truly belonged. The jet disappeared beyond the tree line, and Sarah returned to the devastating reality of her situation. She pulled out her phone to call a taxi, then realized she didn't know where to tell them to take her. She had no home, no destination, no plan for what came next. That's when she heard the car engines. 3 black SUVs were racing up the road toward the Blackwood estate, moving with the kind of precision that suggested official business or serious trouble. Sarah pressed herself against the stone pillar beside the gate, instinctively trying to become invisible as the vehicles approached. The lead SUV stopped directly in front of her. The rear door opened, and Sarah's world exploded into fragments. "Hello, sweetheart." The voice belonged to a man she hadn't seen in 10 years, hadn't spoken to in 5, and had spent her entire marriage pretending didn't exist. A man who stepped out of the SUV wearing a perfectly tailored suit and an expression of barely controlled fury that made Sarah's blood run cold with recognition. "Dad, welcome to a story about the masks we wear to protect ourselves from pain, the price of trying to belong where we're not wanted, and the moment when someone decides to stop hiding their power to protect the people they love." Sarah thinks her life is over, but she's about to discover that sometimes rock bottom is just the foundation for building something unbreakable. Richard Chen looked exactly as Sarah remembered. Silver hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of presence that made even the air around him seem to vibrate with authority. But there was something new in his expression as he looked at his daughter sitting broken beside the road. A cold rage that promised consequences for whoever had put her there. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "I came to take my daughter home." Richard's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, but Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. She'd spent 5 years building a life separate from her father's world. 5 years trying to prove she could succeed without his money or influence. "Dad, I can't. I made my choice when I married David. I chose to build my own life. And how's that working out for you?" The question wasn't cruel, just factual. Sarah looked around at her circumstances, sitting beside the road with a suitcase, tears on her face, and nowhere to go, and realized she didn't have an answer. "The Blackwoods threw you out," Richard continued, his tone growing more dangerous with each word. "They humiliated you, stole 5 years of your life, and discarded you like garbage." "Sarah, that ends now." "Dad, you don't understand. I signed a prenup. I have no legal claim to anything." "Sweetheart, legal claims are for people who play by the rules. We're about to play by different rules entirely." Richard gestured toward the SUVs, where Sarah could see other figures waiting. Men and women in business attire who radiated the kind of competence that came from solving very expensive problems for very powerful people. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. For 5 years, I've respected your choice to live independently. I've watched from a distance while you struggled to earn love from people who were never going to give it to you. I've stayed silent while you tried to prove you didn't need your family's protection." Richard moved closer, and Sarah could see tears in his eyes despite the steel in his voice. "But nobody hurts my daughter and walks away. Nobody." Sarah felt something shifting inside her chest. Not just relief at seeing her father, but recognition of a power she'd forgotten she had access to. For 5 years, she'd been Sarah Blackwood, trying to earn acceptance from people who saw her as an outsider. But she'd been born Sarah Chen, daughter of one of the most powerful men in the country. "Dad, what are you planning to do?" "I'm planning to remind the Blackwood family exactly who they just declared war on." As Sarah looked into her father's eyes, she realized that her marriage ending wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was about to become a very public reckoning between two families with very different ideas about power, respect, and what happened to people who underestimated the quiet girl who'd been trying so hard to belong. But first, Sarah had to decide whether she was ready to stop being the victim and start being the weapon. 20 minutes later, Sarah sat in the back of her father's SUV, watching the Blackwood estate disappear behind them as they drove toward the private airfield. The interior of the vehicle was more luxurious than most people's homes, but Sarah barely noticed. She was too busy processing the whiplash of going from destitute to protected in the span of a phone call she hadn't even made. "Dad, how did you know what happened to me?" Richard was reviewing documents on a tablet, his fingers moving with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing multiple crises simultaneously. "I've had people monitoring your situation for 5 years." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. "You've been spying on me? I've been protecting you. There's a difference. I specifically asked you not to interfere in my marriage." Richard looked up from his tablet, and Sarah saw something in his expression that looked like regret mixed with vindication. "And I honored that request right up until your husband's family decided to destroy you based on fabricated evidence." Sarah stared at him. "The photographs are fake? The photographs are real. The circumstances under which they were taken are completely manufactured." Richard handed Sarah his tablet, and she found herself looking at surveillance footage from what appeared to be a hotel restaurant. The timestamp showed 3 days ago, the same day Margaret had confronted her with evidence of her supposed affair. "That's me," Sarah said, watching herself having lunch with a man she didn't recognize. "But I've never seen that man before in my life. His name is Marcus Torres. He's an actor who specializes in corporate espionage and staged compromising situations." Sarah felt sick as she watched the footage. Herself appearing to have an intimate lunch with a handsome stranger, laughing at his jokes, accepting what looked like romantic gifts. "Dad, I don't remember any of this." "Because you were drugged." "Sarah, look at your behavior in that footage. Look at your body language, your facial expressions. That's not how you act when you're in control of your faculties." Sarah studied the video more carefully, noting how her movements seemed slightly delayed, how her smiles appeared forced and unnatural. Someone drugged me and staged this entire encounter? Someone hired professional operatives to create evidence of adultery that would void your prenup and allow the Blackwood family to discard you without financial obligation. Sarah felt rage building in her chest, not just at the violation, but at the calculated cruelty of the setup. Who would do this? That's what we're going to find out. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a long-term plan executed by people with significant resources and no ethical constraints. Sarah thought about Margaret's satisfaction when she'd presented the photographs, about David's immediate willingness to believe the worst about his wife of 5 years. They were planning this from the beginning, or at least from the moment they realized you weren't going to be the compliant, grateful daughter-in-law they'd expected. The SUV pulled into the private airfield, where Sarah could see the jet she'd watched landing earlier. Up close, it was even more impressive, sleek, modern, and bearing a logo she recognized from her childhood. "Dad, that's the Chin Industries jet. It's one of them." "Sarah, we need to talk about why you really left home 10 years ago." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "I left because I wanted independence. I wanted to build my own life without relying on family money or influence." "That's the story you've been telling yourself. But sweetheart, that's not the whole truth." Richard helped her out of the SUV, and Sarah was struck by how different she felt walking across the tarmac compared to how she'd felt sitting on the stone bench an hour ago. The security detail, the private jet, the obvious deference of everyone around her father. It was a reminder of a world she'd deliberately left behind. "Dad, what do you mean that's not the whole truth? You left because you found out about the Kensington merger." Sarah's blood turned cold. The Kensington merger, a hostile takeover that had destroyed thousands of jobs and devastated entire communities. She'd been 22, fresh out of college, and horrified when she discovered that her father's company was behind the destruction. "I left because I couldn't be part of a family that destroyed people's lives for profit. And you were right to be angry about that merger." "Sarah, I've regretted that decision every day for 10 years. They were walking up the jet's stairs now, and Sarah was hit with the familiar scent of leather and luxury that had defined her childhood. But underneath her recognition was wariness. She'd spent a decade trying to build a life based on different values than the ones that had created this wealth. "Dad, are you saying you've changed how you do business?" "I'm saying that losing my daughter taught me that some profits aren't worth the cost." They settled into seats that were more comfortable than most people's beds, and Sarah watched her father's expression as he continued. "Sarah, Chin Industries has spent the past 10 years reversing the damage from the Kensington merger. We've reinvested in the communities we hurt, provided retraining for displaced workers, and changed our acquisition strategies to prioritize worker protection." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving rationalization. "Why didn't you tell me this?" "Because you needed to leave. You needed to prove to yourself that you could build something meaningful without my money or influence. And Sarah, you did build something meaningful. A marriage that just ended in humiliation and financial ruin? A marriage that taught you how to love someone despite their flaws, how to work for acceptance without compromising your values, and how to maintain your integrity even when people were actively trying to destroy it." Sarah felt tears starting again, but they were different tears now. Not just grief for what she'd lost, but recognition of what she'd learned. "Dad, the Blackwoods weren't just cruel to me. They were actively destructive. Which is why we're going to destroy them back. But Sarah, I need you to understand what that means." Richard pulled out another tablet, this one showing financial documents that made Sarah's eyes widen. The Blackwood family fortune is built on debt, tax evasion, and fraud. Their real estate empire is leveraged beyond sustainable limits. Their social standing is maintained through money laundering and political corruption. Sarah stared at the documents. How do you know all this? Because I've been investigating them for 5 years, ever since you married David. I wanted to make sure my daughter was safe, and what I found was a family that specializes in using the legal system to destroy people who become inconvenient. You mean like me? You're not the first woman they've discarded through manufactured evidence and prenup manipulation. Margaret Blackwood has perfected this strategy over the past 20 years. Sarah felt sick again. Other women? David's had 3 previous relationships that ended exactly the same way. Staged evidence of infidelity, immediate divorce proceedings, and the women left with nothing. Sarah realized she'd been looking at her marriage completely wrong. She'd thought David loved her, but was weak in the face of family pressure. The reality was much worse. David was an active participant in a pattern of systematic abuse. Dad, what are you planning to do with this information? That depends on what you want to happen to the people who hurt you. Sarah looked around the jet, at the luxury that represented her father's power, at the documents that could destroy the Blackwood family, at the choice between accepting protection and seeking justice. What are my options? Option 1. We make this go away quietly. I provide you with enough money to rebuild your life anywhere you want. The Blackwoods never contact you again, and everyone moves on. And option 2? Option 2. We expose the Blackwood family for what they really are. We destroy their reputation, their finances, and their ability to hurt other women. But Sarah, if we go that route, your life will never be private again. Sarah thought about the other women who'd been destroyed by the same pattern that had just devastated her. What happened to them? The other women David discarded? Richard's expression darkened. One committed suicide. One disappeared completely and hasn't been seen in 3 years. One is living in poverty, too broken to rebuild her life. Sarah felt something hardening in her chest, not just anger, but responsibility. They're going to keep doing this to other women, unless someone with enough power stops them. Sarah looked at her father, understanding finally that this choice wasn't just about her own healing. It was about whether she was willing to use her family's power to protect future victims. Dad, if we expose them, what happens to David? David goes to prison for fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Margaret faces charges for orchestrating multiple counts of fraud and possible accessory to manslaughter in the suicide case. Sarah felt the weight of that consequence. Despite everything, she'd loved David for 5 years. The idea of destroying him completely was both satisfying and terrible. And what happens to me? You become Sarah Chin again. Publicly, permanently, and with all the power and responsibility that name carries. Sarah realized her father wasn't just offering her revenge. He was offering her a complete transformation back into someone she'd tried to leave behind. Dad, what if I'm not ready for that responsibility? Then we'll make sure you're ready. Sarah, you've spent 10 years learning how to live without power. Now it's time to learn how to use power responsibly. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message that made her blood freeze. Sarah, this is David. I know you're angry, but we need to talk. I've learned some things about my family that change everything. Please call me. Sarah showed the message to her father, whose expression shifted to something dangerous. Interesting timing. What do you mean? I mean, David Blackwood just realized that you have backup, and now he wants to negotiate. Sarah stared at the message, understanding that David's sudden desire to communicate wasn't based on love or regret. It was based on fear of what her father might do to his family. Dad, what if David really has learned things that change the situation? Then we'll find out what he knows. But Sarah, we'll find out on our terms, not his. As the jet taxied for takeoff, Sarah realized that her humiliation beside the road had been the end of one life and the beginning of another. The question was whether the woman she was becoming would be someone she could live with. Because power was seductive, revenge was satisfying, and justice was complicated. And Sarah Chin was about to discover that all 3 could be more dangerous than the helplessness she was leaving behind. The jet was climbing to cruising altitude when Sarah's phone rang. David's number. Don't answer it, Richard advised, but Sarah was already accepting the call. David. Sarah, thank God. Listen to me carefully. My family is planning something tonight that will make everything that's happened so far look like a warm-up. Sarah put the call on speaker, noting how her father's expression immediately shifted to sharp attention. What are you talking about? I found files in my mother's safe. Sarah, there's another woman. Someone named Elena Rodriguez who's been seeing my cousin Marcus for 6 months. They're planning to stage the same setup with her tonight. Sarah felt her stomach drop. David, are you saying? I'm saying that while I was upstairs convinced you'd betrayed me, my mother was already moving to destroy another innocent woman. Sarah, Elena is 23 years old. She has no idea what she's walking into. Richard was already typing on his tablet, his fingers moving with urgent precision. Sarah watched him pull up information about Elena Rodriguez, a graduate student, part-time art teacher, from a family with no money or connections to protect her. David, where is Elena right now? She's supposed to be having dinner with Marcus at the Grandview Hotel. The same hotel where they staged your photographs. Sarah looked at her father, who was coordinating with his security team through hand signals and silent communication. David, why are you telling me this? Why should I believe anything you say? David's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine desperation. Because I just realized that my mother has been using me to destroy women for years, and I can't live with being part of it anymore. You participated in destroying our marriage. I participated because I believed evidence that I now know was fabricated. Sarah, I loved you. I still love you. But whether you believe that or not, Elena Rodriguez is about to have her life destroyed by the same people who destroyed ours. Richard leaned forward to speak into the phone. Mr. Blackwood, this is Richard Chun. If you're genuinely trying to help, you'll provide us with the files you found. Mr. Chun, I can do better than that. I can give you access to the accounts my mother uses to pay for these operations, the names of everyone involved, and the location where they're holding the photographer who's been creating the staged evidence. Sarah stared at the phone, understanding that David's offer represented either genuine remorse or the most sophisticated manipulation she'd ever encountered. What do you want in exchange? Richard asked. I want immunity from prosecution for my previous involvement, and I want to help you stop my family before they destroy Elena Rodriguez. Sarah felt the weight of impossible choice settling on her shoulders. Trust the man who'd betrayed her to save a woman she'd never met, or let Elena Rodriguez be destroyed while maintaining distance from David's manipulation. Dad, how long do we have? Richard checked his watch. If they're following the same timeline they used with you, maybe 2 hours before Elena walks into a situation she can't escape from. Sarah thought about the surveillance footage of herself, drugged and unaware, being positioned for photographs that would destroy her marriage. The idea of Elena experiencing that same violation made her physically sick. David, if I agree to work with you, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we save Elena Rodriguez, gather evidence that will destroy my family's operation, and make sure no other woman ever goes through what you did. And then what? We reconcile and pretend the past week never happened. David was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect reconciliation. I just expect to live with myself knowing that I tried to stop the pattern instead of perpetuating it. Richard was reviewing real-time intelligence on his tablet. Sarah, I'm seeing movement around the Grandview Hotel. If we're going to intervene, it has to be now. Sarah felt the moment of choice crystallizing around her. She could let Elena Rodriguez be destroyed while focusing on her own healing and revenge. Or she could risk everything to save a stranger while potentially walking back into David's manipulation. Dad, what are the risks of intervention? If this is genuine, we save Elena and gather evidence that will destroy the Blackwood operation permanently. If this is a trap, we expose ourselves to whatever they're really planning. And if we don't intervene, then Elena Rodriguez becomes another casualty, and the Blackwood family continues operating with the knowledge that they can destroy people without consequences. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming message from an unknown number. Asterisk Miss Chin, this is Elena Rodriguez. I don't know who you are, but someone just told me I'm in danger and that you might be able to help me. I'm scared and don't know who to trust. Asterisk. Sarah stared at the message, realizing that someone, possibly David, possibly someone else, had already connected Elena to her situation. Dad, how did Elena get my number? Richard's expression was grim. That's a very good question. David, how does Elena Rodriguez have my daughter's contact information? I gave it to her. After I found the files, I called Elena and told her to reach out to you for help. Sarah felt unease building. David, that means Elena knows who I am and what happened to me. Which means she also knows that you're someone with the resources and motivation to help her. Richard leaned back in his seat, his expression calculating. Sarah, this situation has moved beyond a simple rescue operation. Elena Rodriguez has been deliberately connected to our family, which means we're now responsible for her safety regardless of David's motivations. Sarah understood what her father was saying. By involving her in Elena's situation, David had created a scenario where walking away would make her complicit in whatever happened to Elena. Dad, this feels like we're being maneuvered into a position where we have to act. Probably because we are. The question is whether the manipulation is coming from David or from someone else who wants us involved in this situation. Sarah's phone rang again. Elena Rodriguez. Miss Chin, please, I need help. I'm at the Grandview Hotel and something feels wrong. The man I'm supposed to meet, Marcus, he's acting strange, and there are people here who seem to be watching me. Sarah could hear fear in Elena's voice. Genuine terror from someone who was realizing she was trapped in a situation she didn't understand. Elena, where are you exactly? I'm in the bathroom of the restaurant. Miss Chin, I tried to leave but there are men by the exits. I think I'm being held here. Richard was already on another phone, coordinating with his security team. We can be at the Grandview in 20 minutes. Elena, stay where you are. Don't drink anything, don't eat anything, and don't go anywhere alone with anyone. We're coming to get you. Miss Chin, what if they don't let me wait? What if they force me to? The call went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, feeling responsibility settling on her shoulders like a weight. Elena Rodriguez was trapped in the same situation that had destroyed Sarah's life, and now Sarah was the only person who could prevent it from happening again. Dad, we have to save her. Even if it means walking into a potential trap? Even if it means trusting David? Even if it means exposing ourselves to whatever the Blackwood family is really planning. Sarah thought about Elena's frightened voice, about the other women who'd been destroyed by the same pattern, about the choice between personal safety and moral responsibility. Especially if it means all of those things. Richard smiled with something that looked like pride. Then let's go save Elena Rodriguez and destroy the people who hurt you. As their jet began descending toward the airport nearest to the Grandview Hotel, Sarah realized that her decision to save Elena had committed her to a path that would transform her from victim to protector, regardless of the personal cost. But what Sarah didn't know was that Elena Rodriguez wasn't just another potential victim. She was David Blackwood's half-sister, born from an affair that Margaret had covered up for 25 years. And the real reason David wanted to save Elena had nothing to do with redemption, and everything to do with protecting the one person whose existence could destroy his family's reputation more completely than any financial scandal. Because sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't about money or power. They're about the family members you've been pretending don't exist. The Grandview Hotel's parking lot was a carefully orchestrated chaos when Sarah and her father's security team arrived. 3 black SUVs positioned strategically around the building, communications equipment that would make government agencies jealous, and a level of coordination that suggested Richard Chin had been planning for this kind of operation long before Elena Rodriguez called for help. Sarah, I need you to understand the rules, Richard said as they sat in the lead vehicle, watching the hotel through high-powered surveillance equipment. We go in, we extract Elena, we gather evidence, and we leave. No confrontations, no dramatic speeches, no attempts to save David from his own choices. What if David really has changed? What if he's genuinely trying to help? Then he'll prove it through actions, not words. Sarah, men like David don't experience moral epiphanies overnight. They experience strategic calculations when their survival is threatened. Sarah watched the hotel entrance through the surveillance screen, noting the figures positioned around the building who were clearly more than hotel staff. Dad, how many people are involved in this operation? More than we initially thought. Margaret Blackwood has been running a sophisticated network for years. Professional photographers, security personnel, legal advisors, medical consultants who specialize in administering drugs that create memory gaps. Medical consultants? The kind of doctors who lose their licenses for ethical violations and then freelance for people who pay well for questionable services. Sarah felt sick thinking about the level of planning that had gone into her own destruction. How did you figure all this out? I've been investigating Margaret Blackwood since the day you married her son. What I found was a woman who treats human destruction as a business model. Richard's communications specialist interrupted their conversation. Sir, we have a problem. Elena Rodriguez isn't in the bathroom anymore. She's been moved to a private dining room on the 3rd floor. Moved by who? Hotel security, supposedly for her own safety. But sir, the men who moved her aren't on the hotel's payroll. Sarah felt panic rising. Dad, they have her. Not yet. Sarah, Elena is smart enough to call for help, which means she's smart enough to stay alive until we can reach her. Richard was coordinating with his team through hand signals and encrypted communication. Sarah watched the precision of their operation and realized that her father's business empire included capabilities she'd never imagined. Dad, when you said you changed your business practices after the Kensington merger, what exactly did you mean? I meant that Chin Industries now specializes in protecting people from the kind of predators who used to be our clients. Sarah stared at him. You're running a private security and investigation company. Among other things. Sarah, when I lost you, I realized that my money and power were meaningless if I couldn't protect the people I loved. So I retooled everything to make sure I'd never be helpless again. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from David. Asterisk Sarah, Elena is my half-sister. Margaret doesn't know that I know. This isn't just about stopping the setup. It's about protecting family that Margaret would kill to keep secret. Asterisk. Sarah showed the message to her father, whose expression shifted to something dangerous. Interesting. Dad, what does this mean? It means David's motivation for saving Elena isn't redemption, it's self-preservation. If Elena's parentage becomes public, it exposes an affair that could destroy Margaret's social standing and reveal decades of financial fraud used to cover up the illegitimate child. Sarah felt the complexity of the situation multiplying. So David isn't trying to save Elena from the setup. He's trying to save her from being murdered to protect family secrets. Which makes this situation much more dangerous than we anticipated. Richard's phone rang. Margaret Blackwood. Answer it, Richard told Sarah. Let's see what she wants. Sarah accepted the call with growing dread. Mrs. Blackwood. Sarah, dear, I understand you're at the Grandview Hotel with your father's little army. How dramatic. We're here to prevent you from destroying another innocent woman. Margaret's laugh was cold, calculating. Oh, Sarah, you still don't understand what's really happening. Elena Rodriguez isn't innocent, and this isn't about preventing anything. What do you mean? I mean, Elena Rodriguez has been working with us for months. The frightened phone call, the desperate plea for help, the convenient connection to your situation. All carefully orchestrated to draw you and your father into a very public confrontation. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. You're saying Elena is part of the setup? I'm saying Elena is a very talented actress who's been paid quite well to lure you into a situation where your father's aggressive response will be documented and used to destroy his reputation. Richard was already reviewing intelligence on his tablet, his expression growing darker by the moment. Sarah, we're surrounded. Margaret has media crews positioned around the building, law enforcement on standby to respond to reports of an armed confrontation, and enough legal firepower to turn this into a public relations nightmare. Dad, we walked into a trap. We walked into a sophisticated operation designed to neutralize our ability to expose the Blackwood family by making us look like dangerous vigilantes. Sarah's phone rang again. Elena Rodriguez. Miss Chin, please help me. They're saying I have to sign papers or something terrible will happen to my family. But now Sarah could hear something different in Elena's voice. Not genuine terror, but the kind of controlled performance that came from reading a script. Elena, who's making you sign papers? I don't know. Men in suits. They say my mother owes money and that signing these papers will protect her. Sarah looked at her father, who was coordinating what appeared to be a full-scale retreat. Elena, where exactly are you right now? I'm in a conference room. Miss Chin, I'm scared. But Sarah could hear something in the background. Multiple voices, the sound of equipment being moved, the bustle of people preparing for something larger than a simple intimidation session. Dad, this isn't a rescue operation. It's a media event, with us cast as the aggressors and the Blackwood family as the victims. Sarah, Margaret is brilliant at turning public perception into legal weapons. Sarah felt rage building as she understood the scope of the manipulation. She never intended to destroy Elena the same way she destroyed me. She intended to use Elena as bait to destroy us. And it's working perfectly. Sarah, if we attempt to extract Elena, we'll be recorded assaulting hotel security and kidnapping a young woman who will testify that we're the ones who threatened her. And if we don't attempt to extract her, then Elena will be found tomorrow morning, apparently traumatized by our threatening behavior, with enough evidence to support criminal charges against both of us. Sarah stared at the hotel, understanding that every choice available to them had been carefully constructed to lead to their destruction. Dad, what if we just leave? What if we refuse to play Margaret's game? Then Elena Rodriguez, who may or may not be an innocent victim, faces whatever Margaret actually has planned for her. And we live with the knowledge that we abandoned someone who asked for our help. Sarah felt the impossible weight of choices where every option led to devastating consequences. Save Elena and face criminal charges, or abandon Elena and face moral consequences. Sarah, Richard said quietly, there's something else you need to know about Elena Rodriguez. What? She's not just David's half-sister. She's also your half-sister. Sarah felt the world explode around her. What? Your mother and Margaret Blackwood had the same affair partner 25 years ago. Elena Rodriguez is the daughter your mother gave up for adoption to protect your father's reputation. Sarah stared at her father, understanding finally why Margaret's trap had been so sophisticated and why David's desperation had seemed so genuine. You've known about Elena for 25 years? I've known about Elena since the day she was born. I've been watching over her from a distance, making sure she was safe and protected. And you never told me I had a sister? I never told you because your mother made me promise that Elena would have a chance to build her life without the burden of our family's complications. Sarah felt betrayal cutting through her like a blade. Dad, everything you've told me about changing your business practices, about protecting people, has any of it been true? All of it has been true. Sarah, I changed everything about how I do business because I realized I had two daughters who deserved better than a father who used power to hurt people instead of protecting them. Sarah looked at the hotel where her sister was either being held hostage or performing in an elaborate setup designed to destroy their family. Dad, what if Elena doesn't know she's our family? Then she's about to find out in the worst possible way. Sarah's phone buzzed with another call from David. Sarah, Margaret just realized that I know about Elena's real parentage. She's moving to eliminate Elena permanently rather than risk the secret being exposed. This isn't a setup anymore, it's become a real threat. Sarah showed the message to her father, who was already coordinating with his security team for an immediate assault on the hotel. Dad, if David is telling the truth, Elena is about to be murdered to protect a secret that's been hidden for 25 years. And if David is lying, we're about to commit multiple felonies on camera while trying to rescue someone who's working with our enemies. Sarah looked at the hotel, at her father's tactical team, at the choice between trusting the man who'd betrayed her and abandoning the sister she'd never known existed. Dad, what if we're both right? What if Elena started as part of Margaret's setup, but became a real target when Margaret realized how much Elena actually knows? Then we're about to find out whether our family is strong enough to save each other when the stakes are life and death. As Richard's team prepared to storm the hotel, Sarah realized that her decision to save Elena had evolved into something much more complex. A battle for family secrets that reached back decades and forward into a future where the Chun family would either emerge united or be destroyed by the same forces that had been manipulating them from the beginning. But what Sarah didn't know was that Elena Rodriguez had been recording every conversation, documenting every interaction, and building a case that would ultimately expose not just the Blackwood family's crimes, but the hidden connections between three families whose secrets had been intertwined for 25 years. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in any conspiracy is the one everyone assumes is powerless. And sometimes the best way to protect yourself is to make sure everyone else destroys each other first. The assault on the Grandview Hotel lasted exactly 4 minutes. Richard's team moved with military precision, disabling security cameras, neutralizing Margaret's planted operatives, and reaching the third-floor conference room where Elena Rodriguez was supposedly being held captive. What they found changed everything. The conference room was empty except for a single laptop displaying a video feed that showed Elena sitting in what appeared to be Richard's own corporate jet, speaking directly into the camera with the calm confidence of someone who'd been in complete control all along. Hello, Sarah. Hello, Mr. Chin. By the time you're watching this, you'll have realized that everything you thought you knew about tonight was carefully constructed to bring us all together for this conversation. Sarah stared at the screen, feeling reality reshape itself around her. Dad, that's your jet. Elena, how did you? Richard started, then stopped as understanding hit him. You've had access to the jet all along. Elena's smile on the screen was sad but determined. I've had access to a lot of things all along. Sarah, I need you to sit down for what I'm about to tell you. Sarah found herself sinking into a chair, her mind racing through the implications of Elena being in Richard's private aircraft. Elena, are you really my sister? I'm really your sister. But I'm not David's half-sister. That was a lie designed to manipulate him into thinking he was protecting family. And I'm not a helpless victim. I'm a federal agent who's been investigating both the Blackwood and Chin families for the past 2 years. Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. You're FBI? I'm FBI, but I'm also genuinely your sister. Sarah, our mother didn't give me up for adoption to protect Dad's reputation. She gave me up because Dad was being investigated for money laundering, and she was afraid I'd be used as leverage against the family. Richard was staring at the screen with an expression Sarah had never seen before. Not anger or surprise, but something that looked like recognition. Elena, how long have you known who you really are? I've known since I was 18 and decided to become a federal agent specifically to investigate the family that abandoned me. Sarah, everything that's happened to you, the marriage to David, the setup with the photographs, even tonight's rescue operation, has been part of a larger investigation into how powerful families use the legal system to destroy people. Sarah felt like she was falling through space. Elena, are you saying you've been manipulating my entire life for 2 years? I'm saying I've been documenting how your life was being manipulated by people who see you as either an asset or a threat, never as a person. Elena's expression on the screen grew more serious. Sarah, the Blackwood family's operation isn't just about discarding inconvenient wives. It's about identifying and destroying potential threats to a network of powerful families who've been covering for each other's crimes for decades. Richard was reviewing something on his tablet, his face growing pale. Elena, what have you found? I've found that Margaret Blackwood has been documenting the criminal activities of dozens of wealthy families, including ours, and using that information to protect herself and eliminate threats. The women she's destroyed weren't just inconvenient. They were people who'd discovered evidence that could expose the entire network. Sarah felt sick. You're saying I was targeted because I might have found evidence of crimes? I'm saying you were targeted because you're an accountant married into a family whose finances are built on fraud, and you're the daughter of a man whose business empire has connections to every major financial crime in the city for the past 20 years. Sarah looked at her father, seeing him in a completely different light. Dad, is that true? Richard was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, Chin Industries has been used to launder money for other powerful families. Not by choice, but because the alternative was having our own crimes exposed. What crimes? The Kensington merger wasn't just ethically questionable. It was insider trading based on information we obtained through illegal surveillance. Sarah, I didn't change our business practices because I had a moral awakening. I changed them because I was being blackmailed. Sarah felt her understanding of her entire life crumbling. Dad, everything you've told me about protecting me, about changing how you do business, was true but incomplete. Sarah, I've been trying to protect you from people who see our family as either useful tools or dangerous liabilities. Elena's voice from the laptop drew their attention back to the screen. Sarah, there's something else you need to know. The reason Margaret Blackwood was so confident about destroying you is because she has evidence that could send Dad to prison for 20 years. What evidence? Evidence that the money used to pay for your education, your wedding, and your lifestyle has been stolen from pension funds, charitable organizations, and government contracts over the past 15 years. Sarah looked at her father, understanding finally why he'd been so desperate to protect her and so willing to destroy the Blackwood family. Dad, my entire life has been built on stolen money? Your entire life has been built on my attempts to provide for you while being extorted by people who use financial crimes as weapons against each other. Elena continued from the screen. Sarah, the choice you're facing isn't between revenge and forgiveness. It's between becoming part of this network of mutually assured destruction or exposing the entire system and accepting the consequences. What consequences? If we expose the network, Dad goes to prison, the Blackwood family goes to prison, and dozens of other powerful families face prosecution for decades of coordinated criminal activity. Sarah felt the weight of impossible choice settling on her shoulders. And if we don't expose it, then the network continues operating, more women like you get destroyed, and our family remains trapped in a system where our survival depends on other people's silence. Richard was studying intelligence reports on his tablet with growing urgency. Elena, where exactly are you right now? I'm in your jet, but not where you think. Sarah, Dad's been tracking the wrong aircraft. I'm in the jet that Margaret Blackwood has been using to move evidence and eliminate threats. Sarah felt ice in her veins. Elena, you're in danger. I'm in Margaret's private aircraft with enough evidence to destroy the entire network. But Sarah, I need you to make a choice right now. What choice? I can transmit this evidence to federal prosecutors, which will trigger arrests within hours and expose everything. Or I can destroy it, which will protect our family but allow the network to continue operating. Sarah looked around the empty conference room, understanding that her sister had engineered this entire situation to force a decision that would determine not just their family's future, but the fate of a criminal network that had been destroying lives for decades. Elena, what happens to you if you transmit the evidence? I disappear into witness protection, and we probably never see each other again. And what happens if you destroy it? I come home, we rebuild our relationship as sisters, and we spend the rest of our lives knowing that we chose family loyalty over justice. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she understood the scope of the choice Elena had given her. Save their family by perpetuating injustice, or pursue justice by destroying their family. Elena, there has to be another option. There is one other option, but it requires trusting David Blackwood completely. Sarah's phone rang. David. Sarah, Elena isn't on Margaret's plane, she's on mine. I've been working with the FBI for 6 months, and tonight was designed to gather enough evidence to prosecute everyone while keeping our families safe. Sarah felt reality shifting again. David, what are you saying? I'm saying Elena and I have been working together to find a way to expose the criminal network while protecting the people we love. Sarah, your marriage to me wasn't a coincidence. It was part of an FBI operation to get close enough to the network to document how it operates. Sarah stared at the phone, understanding that every relationship in her life had been part of a larger investigation she'd never known existed. David, are you saying our entire marriage was fake? I'm saying our marriage started as an operation, but became real. Sarah, I fell in love with you despite the investigation, not because of it. Richard was coordinating with his security team through hand signals, his expression grim. Sarah, we need to make a decision. Margaret Blackwood's people are moving to intercept Elena's aircraft, and we have minutes before this situation becomes irreversible. Sarah looked at the laptop screen where her sister waited for a decision that would reshape multiple families and potentially destroy a criminal network that had operated with impunity for decades. Elena, if I choose to expose the network, what happens to the other victims? The women who've already been destroyed. They get justice, compensation, and the knowledge that their suffering stopped other people from being hurt. And if I choose to protect our family? Then we live with the knowledge that we had the power to stop injustice and chose self-preservation instead. Sarah felt the weight of moral choice that went far beyond personal consequences. She was being asked to decide whether justice was worth destroying the people she loved. Elena, Sarah, David's voice came through the phone. There's a third option we haven't discussed. What? We expose the network, accept the consequences for our families, and use our resources to build something better from the wreckage. Sarah, your father's money may have come from crime, but it can be used to repair the damage and prevent future victims. Sarah looked at her father, seeing something in his expression that might have been hope. Dad, could we actually do that? Could we turn our family's resources into something that helps instead of hurts? Sarah, if we survive this, I promise you that Chin Industries will become everything I should have built from the beginning. Elena's voice from the laptop was urgent now. Sarah, I need your decision. Margaret's people are closing in, and if I don't transmit this evidence in the next 60 seconds, the opportunity is gone forever. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking about the woman she'd been when this all started. Someone trying to earn love from people who saw her as disposable. Then she thought about the woman she was becoming, someone with the power to choose justice over comfort. Elena, transmit the evidence. Sarah, are you sure? I'm sure. Elena, come home. Let's find out what our family looks like when it's built on truth instead of lies. As Elena began transmitting evidence that would destroy dozens of powerful families and reshape the criminal justice system, Sarah realized that her humiliation beside the road had been the beginning of the most important choice she'd ever make. Because sometimes the only way to save yourself is to save everyone else first, even if it costs you everything you thought you wanted. The evidence transmission took 47 seconds. In those 47 seconds, Sarah watched her entire world disintegrate in real time. Elena's laptop screen showed federal databases updating, arrest warrants being generated, and emergency protocols activating across multiple law enforcement agencies. By the 48th second, Richard Chun was under arrest. Sarah Chun, you are under arrest as an accessory to money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy. Agent Martinez announced as federal agents flooded the hotel conference room. You have the right to remain silent. Sarah watched in horror as her father was handcuffed and led away, his face a mask of resignation and something that might have been pride. The man who had flown across the country to protect her was now facing 20 years in federal prison because of a choice she had made. Agent Martinez, Sarah said as the handcuffs clicked around her own wrists. My father never told me about the criminal activity. I had no knowledge. Ms. Chun, your financial records show that you've been receiving payments from laundered money for over a decade. Your education, your wedding, your lifestyle, all of it funded by criminal enterprises. Sarah felt the cruel irony settling around her like a shroud. She'd chosen justice over family protection, and justice was destroying her anyway. Her phone rang one last time before Agent Martinez confiscated it. David. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I tried to prevent this. David, where are you? I'm in federal custody. Sarah, when Elena transmitted that evidence, it triggered automatic arrests for everyone connected to the financial crimes, including me. Sarah felt her last hope crumbling. You said you were working with the FBI. I was working with the FBI, but I was also guilty of the crimes I was investigating. Sarah, there was no clean way out of this. Everyone involved was going to face consequences. What about Elena? David's voice was strained. Elena's aircraft went down over the ocean 20 minutes ago. Margaret Blackwood's people intercepted her before she could reach federal protection. Sarah's legs gave out. She would have collapsed if not for the handcuffs connecting her to Agent Martinez. Is she? We don't know. The Coast Guard is searching, but Sarah, the chances of survival. The call ended as Agent Martinez took the phone away. As Sarah was led through the hotel lobby, she could see media crews broadcasting live coverage of what was being called the largest coordinated arrest of wealthy Americans in decades. Her picture flashed on television screens as news anchors described her as the accountant daughter whose family secrets triggered a federal investigation that could reshape how white-collar crime is prosecuted. Sarah Chun, who had started the day as a discarded wife with nothing but a suitcase, was now the face of a federal investigation that was destroying dozens of families. The irony was suffocating. The federal holding facility was a concrete reminder that justice didn't distinguish between victims and perpetrators when crimes were this complex. Sarah sat in a cell designed for people awaiting trial for serious federal offenses, trying to process that her choice to expose corruption had resulted in her own imprisonment. Her court-appointed attorney was a tired-looking woman named Jessica Park who delivered news like a surgeon removing tumors, efficiently and without sentiment. Ms. Chun, the federal prosecutors are offering you a deal. Full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. What kind of cooperation? Testimony against your father, detailed financial records of your family's criminal enterprises, and information about other families involved in the network. Sarah stared at the concrete wall of her cell. You want me to testify against my father to reduce my own sentence for crimes I didn't know I was committing. That's the deal. Otherwise, you're looking at 15 to 20 years for conspiracy and money laundering. Sarah thought about her father, who was probably sitting in a similar cell, facing the destruction of everything he'd built. What about Elena? Has she been found? Ms. Chun, I don't have information about your sister's situation. My job is to focus on your legal defense. And David? What's his status? Mr. Blackwood is cooperating fully with federal investigators. His testimony is expected to be central to prosecuting the other families involved in the network. Sarah felt a bitter laugh escape. So David gets to be the hero who exposes corruption, while my family gets destroyed for being part of the same system he was investigating. Ms. Chun, that's how federal prosecutions work. The first person to cooperate gets the best deal. Sarah closed her eyes, understanding that David's declaration of love and redemption had been strategic positioning for exactly this moment. While she'd been agonizing over moral choices, David had been calculating how to survive the inevitable exposure. Ms. Park, what happens if I don't take the deal? Then you go to trial, where the government will present evidence that you've been living off criminal proceeds for over a decade. Given the current political climate around wealth inequality and corporate crime, juries aren't sympathetic to people in your position. Sarah felt the walls of her cell closing in. Take the deal and betray her father, or face decades in prison for crimes she'd unknowingly benefited from. How long do I have to decide? 24 hours. Ms. Chun, I should tell you that your father has already been offered a similar deal. Sarah's blood turned cold. What kind of deal? Full cooperation and testimony against Margaret Blackwood and the other network leaders in exchange for a reduced sentence. Has he accepted? Not yet. But Ms. Chun, your father is 68 years old. A 20-year sentence is effectively a life sentence for him. Sarah understood the impossible choice her father was facing. Save himself by destroying his allies, or protect his criminal partners and die in prison. Ms. Park, is there any way to find out about Elena's situation? I can make some inquiries, but Ms. Chun, you need to focus on your own survival right now. As Jessica Park left, Sarah was alone with the weight of choices that had no right answers. Save herself by destroying her father, or protect her father by accepting decades in prison. Choose loyalty to family or loyalty to justice, knowing that both paths led to devastation. Her cell phone privileges allowed her one call. She dialed the number David had been calling from. Sarah. David, I need you to tell me the truth about something. What? Did you know that choosing to expose the network would result in my arrest? David was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, everyone involved in this system was going to face consequences eventually. The choice was between facing them on our terms or having them imposed on us by forces we couldn't control. That's not an answer to my question. Yes, I knew that exposing the network would result in arrests for everyone connected to the financial crimes, including you. Sarah felt the last of her trust in David evaporate. So when you told me you loved me, when you said our marriage became real despite the investigation. It was real, Sarah. My feelings for you were real. But I also knew that the only way to survive this was to be on the right side when everything collapsed. And you decided that the right side was federal cooperation, regardless of what happened to me. I decided that the right side was justice, even if it meant we couldn't be together. Sarah laughed bitterly. David, justice isn't destroying people who were unknowing beneficiaries of crimes. Justice is holding the people who made the criminal decisions accountable. Sarah, you can't have been completely unaware. Your lifestyle, your father's wealth, the way money appeared whenever your family needed it. I trusted my father when he told me his business was legitimate. I trusted my husband when he said he loved me. I trusted the legal system when it said I was protected by marriage laws. Sarah's voice was rising. Apparently, I was naive enough to believe that the people who claimed to love me wouldn't systematically destroy me. Sarah, I never wanted to destroy you. I wanted to save you from becoming like Margaret Blackwood, someone who perpetuates injustice to protect their own comfort. By turning me into someone who destroys their own family to protect themselves. David was quiet. David, if Elena is dead, if my father goes to prison, if I spend the next 20 years in federal custody, was exposing this network worth that cost? Sarah, if we hadn't exposed it, how many more women would have been destroyed? How many more families would have been victimized? I don't know. But I know that the cost of justice shouldn't be the destruction of everyone who tries to pursue it. Sarah hung up, understanding finally that David's love had been real, but insufficient. He'd loved her enough to feel guilty about betraying her, but not enough to risk his own survival to protect her. 20 minutes later, Jessica Park returned with information that shattered Sarah's remaining hope. Ms. Chun, I have an update on your sister's situation. Did they find her? The Coast Guard recovered the aircraft. There were no survivors. Sarah felt something inside her chest break completely. Elena was dead. Her sister, who had spent 2 years trying to build a case for justice, who had risked everything to expose corruption, who had finally come home to family, gone. Ms. Park, Elena died because she chose to transmit evidence that's now being used to prosecute my family. Ms. Chun, your sister died because she was threatened by people who kill to protect their secrets. That's not your fault. It's my fault because I told her to transmit the evidence. Elena asked me to choose, and I chose justice over family safety. And now you have to choose again. Your father or your freedom. Sarah looked around her cell, understanding that every choice in this situation led to loss. Elena was dead. Her father faced life in prison. David had chosen survival over loyalty. The criminal network would be exposed, but at the cost of destroying everyone who'd tried to expose it. Ms. Park, what happens to Margaret Blackwood and the other network leaders? They face extensive prosecutions based on the evidence your sister transmitted. But Ms. Chun, their wealth and legal resources mean they'll likely receive lighter sentences than the people who cooperated with the investigation. Sarah felt the bitter irony settling like poison in her chest. The people who had created and led the criminal network would survive with minimal consequences, while the people who had exposed it faced destruction. So justice means that the most guilty people receive the least punishment, and the people who tried to do the right thing lose everything. Ms. Chun, that's how the system works when crimes are this complex and resources are this unequal. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling Elena's presence like a ghost in the cell. Her sister had died believing that exposing corruption would create a better world. Instead, it had created a system where the corrupt survived and the idealistic were destroyed. Ms. Park, I want to see my father before I make any decisions about cooperation. I can arrange that. But Ms. Chun, remember that anything you say to your father could be used as evidence. Even family conversations aren't privileged when federal crimes are involved. As Sarah waited for permission to see her father, she understood that the choice Elena had given her had been an illusion. There had never been a path that led to justice without devastating consequences for innocent people. The only real choice was whose destruction to prioritize, her own family's or other families who might be victimized in the future. And Sarah was beginning to understand that sometimes the most moral choice was also the most hopeless one, because justice and survival were not always compatible. And love was not always enough to protect the people you cared about from the consequences of doing what was right. The meeting with her father took place in a sterile federal facility conference room, monitored by cameras and supervised by agents who made it clear that every word would be recorded and analyzed. Richard Chun looked older than Sarah had ever seen him. Not just the exhaustion of imprisonment, but the weight of watching his choices destroy his family. When he saw Sarah in her orange jumpsuit, his composure finally cracked. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this for you. Dad, I know. I made the choice to expose the network. I have to live with the consequences. Richard studied his daughter's face, noting something different in her expression. Not the broken victim who'd been sitting beside the road a week ago, but someone who'd found strength in the midst of devastation. Sarah, Jessica Park told me about the deal they're offering you. She told me about yours too. Dad, are you going to take it? Richard was quiet for a long moment, his hands folded on the metal table between them. Sarah, I've spent 40 years building an empire on compromises with people who had no ethical boundaries. Every deal I made, every alliance I formed, every crime I ignored or participated in, I told myself it was to provide for my family. Dad, let me finish. I told myself that the money laundering was temporary, that the illegal surveillance was necessary, that cooperating with people like Margaret Blackwood was the price of protecting you and Elena from a world that would destroy you if you weren't strong enough. Sarah watched her father's face as he spoke, seeing decades of rationalization crumbling. But the truth is, I became addicted to the power that came from having leverage over other powerful people. I enjoyed being the man who could solve problems that the legal system couldn't touch. Dad, you're not a monster. You made mistakes, but you also tried to protect us. Sarah, I protected you by building your life on blood money. Every advantage you had, every opportunity that opened for you, every safety net that caught you when you fell, all of it came from other people's suffering. Sarah felt tears starting. Dad, what are you saying? I'm saying that the federal prosecutors are right. I'm guilty of every crime they're charging me with, and I deserve the consequences. And I'm saying that guilt isn't that simple. Dad, you may have committed crimes, but Margaret Blackwood built an entire network designed to destroy people. David manipulated me for 2 years as part of an investigation. Elena died trying to expose corruption. Sarah's voice was growing stronger. The people who created this system are facing lighter consequences than the people who tried to fix it. Richard looked at his daughter with something that might have been pride. Sarah, when did you become so wise? When I realized that justice isn't about punishing the right people, it's about creating a world where fewer people get hurt. Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice even though she knew everything was being recorded. Dad, what if we both refuse the deals? Then we both go to prison for decades. And what if we both take the deals? Then we destroy each other to save ourselves, and the federal government gets convictions while the real architects of this system negotiate their way to minimal sentences. Sarah thought about Elena, about the choice her sister had given her, about the moment when she decided that justice was worth any personal cost. Dad, there's a third option. What? We tell the truth. All of it. Not just about our own crimes, but about how this entire system operates. We don't just cooperate with the investigation. We make sure it's thorough enough to reach everyone who deserves consequences. Richard stared at his daughter. Sarah, that would mean exposing information that could destroy dozens of families, including innocent family members who had nothing to do with the crimes. It would also mean that people like Margaret Blackwood don't get to negotiate their way out of accountability, while people like us face the full consequences. And Elena? Sarah, if we expose everything, we also expose the fact that she was operating as a federal agent without proper authorization. Her death could be ruled as the result of her own illegal activity. Sarah felt the complexity of the choice settling around her. Protect Elena's memory by limiting their cooperation, or pursue complete justice regardless of the cost to everyone involved. Dad, what would Elena want us to do? Elena would want us to choose the option that prevents the most future suffering. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking about her sister's final message, about David's strategic betrayal, about Margaret Blackwood's confidence that powerful people could survive anything. Dad, I've made my decision. What? I'm going to testify. Against you, against Margaret, against everyone involved in this network. I'm going to tell the truth about every crime I witnessed, every benefit I received, and every person who participated in or enabled this system. Richard's face went pale. Sarah, that means I'll spend the rest of my life in prison. And it means that the people who created and led this network will face real consequences instead of negotiated slaps on the wrist. Sarah, you'll also spend decades in prison. Full cooperation doesn't guarantee immunity. It just guarantees a slightly reduced sentence. Dad, Elena died believing that exposing this corruption would create a better world. I'm going to make sure her death accomplished something meaningful. Richard was quiet for a long moment, studying his daughter's face. Sarah, are you absolutely certain about this choice? I'm certain that someone in our family needs to choose justice over self-preservation, even if it costs us everything. And if I refuse to cooperate? If I protect my criminal associates while you expose them? Sarah met her father's eyes. Then you and I will have very different ideas about what family loyalty means. Richard smiled sadly. Sarah, you've become the person I should have been 40 years ago. Dad, it's not too late for you to become that person now. Richard was quiet for several minutes, and Sarah could see him wrestling with a choice that would define the rest of his life and his legacy. Sarah, if we both cooperate fully, if we expose everyone and everything, there's something else you need to know. What? Elena isn't dead. Sarah felt the world tilt sideways. What? The plane crash was staged. Elena is in federal protection, but she's alive. Sarah, the evidence transmission, the aircraft going down, even this conversation, it's all part of a larger operation designed to gather enough evidence to prosecute the entire network. Sarah stared at her father, trying to process what he was telling her. You're saying Elena faked her death? I'm saying Elena is a federal agent who's spent 2 years building the most complex organized crime case in decades. Sarah, everything that's happened to you, including your marriage to David, has been part of that investigation. Sarah felt rage building in her chest. Dad, are you telling me that my entire life has been a federal operation? I'm telling you that the federal government has been using our family to build a case against a criminal network that includes some of the most powerful people in the country. And you've known this the entire time? I've known that Elena was alive and working with federal investigators. I didn't know that your marriage to David was part of the operation until tonight. Sarah stood up, pacing the small conference room as she tried to understand the scope of the manipulation. Dad, if Elena is alive, if this is all part of a federal operation, then what's the point of these cooperation deals? The point is to give the prosecution everything they need to dismantle the network completely, while also protecting the agents who've been working undercover. Sarah felt like she was drowning in layers of deception. And David? Is his cooperation real, or is he still working undercover? I don't know. Sarah, at this point, I don't know who's been genuine and who's been acting. Sarah stopped pacing and looked directly at her father. Dad, I need you to tell me one thing honestly. Do you love me? Sarah, you're the most important thing in my life. Everything I've done, every mistake I've made, has been because I love you and Elena more than my own life. Then prove it. Help me make sure that this investigation actually accomplishes something meaningful instead of just rearranging the power structure. Richard looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd transformed from a victim into a force for justice. Sarah, what do you want to accomplish? I want to make sure that people like Margaret Blackwood don't get to destroy lives with impunity. I want the families who've been victimized to receive compensation and acknowledgement. And I want our family to use whatever resources we have left to repair the damage we've caused. Even if it means we both spend years in prison. Especially if it means that, Dad, we can't undo the crimes we've committed or benefited from. But we can make sure that the consequences we face actually serve justice instead of just serving the federal government's conviction statistics. Richard reached across the table and took his daughter's hands. Sarah, if we do this, if we expose everything and accept full responsibility, we're choosing to rebuild our family on a foundation of accountability instead of power. Is that a choice you can live with? It's the choice I should have made 40 years ago. Sarah, let's tell the truth and see what kind of family we can build from the wreckage. As Sarah and Richard prepared to make the choice that would reshape their lives and potentially destroy dozens of other families, Sarah realized that her journey from discarded wife to powerful advocate had required losing everything she thought she wanted in order to discover who she really was. But what Sarah didn't know was that Elena's investigation had uncovered evidence that reached far beyond financial crimes. Evidence of human trafficking, political corruption, and systematic abuse that made the money laundering look trivial by comparison. And the people responsible for those crimes were about to discover that the Chun family had decided to stop protecting their secrets. Because sometimes the most dangerous moment for a criminal network isn't when law enforcement gets close. It's when the people who've been protecting you decide to stop. The federal courthouse was surrounded by media crews when Sarah and Richard Chun arrived to give their testimony. What had started as a financial crimes investigation had exploded into the largest organized crime prosecution in decades, and Sarah was about to become the key witness in exposing a network that reached far beyond money laundering. Ms. Chun, Federal Prosecutor Amanda Walsh began, you've agreed to provide complete testimony about your family's criminal activities and your knowledge of the broader network. Are you prepared to proceed? I am. Sarah looked around the packed courtroom, noting the faces of reporters, federal agents, and family members of other defendants. In the gallery, she could see Margaret Blackwood sitting with a team of expensive lawyers, her expression confident despite the charges against her. Ms. Chun, let's start with your marriage to David Blackwood. When did you first become aware that your husband was involved in criminal activity? I became aware of financial irregularities about 6 months into our marriage, but I didn't understand their significance until much later. What kind of irregularities? Sarah took a breath, knowing that every word she spoke was being broadcast live and would reshape public understanding of how organized crime operated in wealthy communities. Large cash deposits that didn't correspond to David's stated income. Business meetings at unusual hours with people who weren't involved in legitimate construction projects. And phone conversations that David would end abruptly when I entered the room. Did you report these suspicions to anyone? I mentioned them to my father, who advised me to be supportive of my husband's business activities without asking too many questions. Sarah saw her father in the defendant's section, nodding slightly. They'd agreed to tell the complete truth, regardless of how it implicated either of them. Ms. Chun, did there come a time when you learned the true scope of the criminal network your family was involved with? Yes, when my sister Elena revealed that she'd been investigating the network as a federal agent. Prosecutor Walsh paused dramatically. Ms. Chun, is your sister alive? Yes. Agent Elena Rodriguez is alive and working undercover for the FBI. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Margaret Blackwood's confident expression cracked for the first time. Ms. Chun, how do you know your sister is alive? Because she contacted me 3 days ago to coordinate this testimony. Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. Your Honor, I have a letter from Agent Rodriguez explaining the true scope of her investigation and the evidence she's gathered. Judge Harrison accepted the envelope and read its contents, his expression growing increasingly grave. Ms. Chun, according to this letter, Agent Rodriguez's investigation uncovered evidence of crimes beyond financial fraud. Can you describe what you learned? Sarah felt the weight of the moment. This was where Elena's 2-year investigation would finally be revealed to the public. I learned that the financial crimes were just one component of a larger operation involving human trafficking, political corruption, and systematic abuse designed to maintain control over powerful families. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Ms. Chun, can you be more specific? The money laundering wasn't just about hiding illegal profits. It was about funding an operation that blackmailed political figures, trafficked vulnerable women, and eliminated people who posed threats to the network. Sarah looked directly at Margaret Blackwood as she continued. The women who were destroyed through staged affairs and fraudulent divorces weren't just discarded wives. They were witnesses to crimes who needed to be discredited before they could expose what they'd seen. Prosecutor Walsh moved to a screen that displayed financial documents. Ms. Chen, can you identify these records? Sarah studied the documents Elena had provided. Those are payment records showing transfers from Blackwood Construction to offshore accounts that funded safe houses, transportation networks, and elimination services. Elimination services? Assassination contracts for people who became threats to the network. Margaret Blackwood shot to her feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous speculation from a defendant who's clearly trying to reduce her own sentence through sensational allegations. Mrs. Blackwood, Judge Harrison interrupted. You'll have your opportunity to respond. Please sit down. Sarah continued her testimony, feeling Elena's presence guiding her through the revelation of crimes that reached into the highest levels of government and business. Ms. Chen, did you personally witness evidence of these crimes? I witnessed David taking photographs of women who appeared to be drugged and disoriented. I saw financial records showing payments to medical professionals who specialized in memory suppression drugs. And I heard phone conversations where Margaret Blackwood discussed permanent solutions for people who were becoming problematic. Did you report these observations to law enforcement? I reported them to my sister Elena, who was documenting everything as part of her federal investigation. Prosecutor Walsh turned to address the courtroom. Your Honor, at this time the government would like to call Agent Elena Rodriguez to corroborate Ms. Chen's testimony. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and Elena walked in wearing a federal agent's badge and an expression of determination that made Sarah's heart soar with relief and pride. Elena was alive, strong, and about to bring down the network that had destroyed so many lives. Agent Rodriguez, Prosecutor Walsh began, can you describe the scope of your investigation into the Blackwood criminal enterprise? Over the past 2 years, I've documented a network involving 47 families, 16 political figures, and multiple law enforcement officials. The network has been responsible for at least 12 murders, over 200 cases of human trafficking, and financial crimes totaling more than $800 million. Elena pulled out a tablet and displayed images on the courtroom screens. These are photographs from safe houses where trafficked women were held before being moved to buyers around the world. Sarah felt sick looking at the images. Young women who looked terrified, drugged, and completely powerless. Agent Rodriguez, how were victims selected? Victims were typically women who had access to powerful men but lacked family or social connections that would make their disappearance noteworthy. Women like Ms. Chen, who married into wealthy families but had limited independent resources. Sarah understood finally why the Blackwood family had targeted her so specifically. She hadn't just been an inconvenient wife. She'd been a potential trafficking victim whose marriage had provided access to wealthy clients. Agent Rodriguez, what role did the staged affairs and fraudulent divorces play in this operation? The divorces served multiple purposes. They discredited women who might testify about crimes they'd witnessed. They provided legal cover for seizing assets that could be used to fund the operation, and they identified women who were vulnerable to trafficking. Elena looked directly at Margaret Blackwood. Mrs. Blackwood ran the entire operation. She identified targets, coordinated the elimination of threats, and managed the financial networks that kept everything operational. Margaret Blackwood's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, Agent Rodriguez's testimony is clearly fabricated. There's no evidence. Elena interrupted by activating a recording device. Margaret Blackwood's voice filled the courtroom. The Rodriguez girl has become a problem. She knows too much about the safe house operations. We need a permanent solution before she can compromise the entire network. The recording continued with Margaret discussing specific plans to eliminate Elena and other potential witnesses. Mrs. Blackwood, Judge Harrison said, his voice carrying barely controlled outrage, you are advised that anything you say from this point forward can and will be used against you in criminal proceedings. Sarah watched Margaret's face as she realized that her entire operation had been documented and was about to be exposed to the world. Agent Rodriguez, Prosecutor Walsh continued, what was Ms. Chen's role in your investigation? Ms. Chen was unknowingly married to one of our targets, but she became a crucial witness when she chose to expose the network despite the personal consequences. Elena looked at Sarah with genuine admiration. My sister chose justice over self-preservation, even when it meant destroying her own family's resources and facing decades in prison. And what was Richard Chen's ultimate role? Mr. Chen was initially a victim of the network's blackmail, but he became a willing participant when he realized the financial benefits. However, when faced with the choice between protecting the network and protecting future victims, he chose to cooperate fully with our investigation. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Agent Rodriguez, what is the current status of the other network participants? As of this morning, we have arrested 43 individuals across 12 states. The trafficking operations have been shut down, the financial networks have been frozen, and the victims who could be located are receiving medical care and legal protection. Sarah felt something lifting in her chest. Not just relief, but the satisfaction of knowing that Elena's investigation had actually accomplished its goals. Agent Rodriguez, what happens to the assets recovered from this network? The recovered assets, totaling approximately $600 million, will be used to compensate victims, fund anti-trafficking organizations, and support the prosecution of remaining network members. Elena turned to address Sarah directly. Ms. Chen, the court has authorized the creation of the Elena Rodriguez Foundation for victims of organized trafficking and financial crimes. The foundation will be funded by recovered assets and managed by people who understand the true cost of these crimes. Sarah understood what Elena was telling her. Their family's wealth would be transformed into something that helped instead of hurt people. Agent Rodriguez, what is your recommendation regarding Ms. Chen's sentencing? Ms. Chen should receive credit for her cooperation, but more importantly, she should be given the opportunity to lead the foundation's work. She has the accounting skills, the personal experience, and the moral commitment necessary to ensure that recovered assets are used effectively. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she realized that Elena had found a way for their family to rebuild itself around service instead of exploitation. And regarding Mr. Chen? Mr. Chen should face consequences for his crimes, but his cooperation has been essential to dismantling the network. The court should consider his willingness to sacrifice his own freedom to protect future victims. Judge Harrison was reviewing documents provided by Elena. Agent Rodriguez, this investigation represents an extraordinary achievement in law enforcement cooperation. How do you assess the likelihood of preventing similar networks from forming in the future? Your Honor, organized crime adapts to law enforcement techniques, but this case demonstrates that family members and insider witnesses can be the most effective tools for exposing and dismantling criminal enterprises. Elena looked around the courtroom. The people who created and led this network relied on the assumption that their victims and associates would prioritize self-preservation over justice. When people like my sister choose to tell the truth regardless of personal cost, criminal networks become vulnerable. As Elena concluded her testimony, Sarah realized that her journey from humiliated wife to powerful advocate had required losing everything she thought she wanted in order to discover what she was actually capable of achieving. But the most important revelation was still coming. Your Honor, Elena continued, there's one more aspect of this case that the court needs to understand. What is that, Agent Rodriguez? The Blackwood Network wasn't operating independently. It was connected to similar operations in 17 other cities, all coordinated by a single organization that has been trafficking and exploiting vulnerable people for over 20 years. Elena activated another screen showing a complex organizational chart. This investigation has provided the evidence necessary to dismantle the entire national network, but that will require continued cooperation from witnesses like Ms. Chen, who are willing to prioritize justice over personal comfort. Sarah understood that Elena was offering her a choice that would define the rest of her life. Use her experience and resources to continue fighting the forces that had nearly destroyed her, or accept a reduced sentence and retreat to private life. Looking around the courtroom at the faces of reporters who would tell this story to the world, at the federal agents who had risked their lives to expose corruption, at her father who had chosen accountability over self-protection, and at her sister who had spent 2 years building a case for justice, Sarah made the only choice that felt authentic. Your Honor, I want to dedicate my life to making sure that the resources recovered from this network are used to prevent other families from experiencing what mine has been through. Judge Harrison smiled for the first time during the proceedings. Ms. Chen, the court accepts your offer of continued cooperation and community service. You will serve 2 years in federal custody followed by 10 years of supervised community service, managing the foundation established to assist victims of organized trafficking and financial crimes. Sarah felt overwhelming relief mixed with determination. She would face consequences for the crimes she'd unknowingly benefited from, but she would also have the opportunity to transform those crimes into something meaningful. As the court session ended and Margaret Blackwood was led away in handcuffs, Sarah realized that her humiliation beside the road had been the beginning of the most important work of her life. Because sometimes the most powerful response to being victimized is to make sure no one else experiences the same suffering. And sometimes the best use of privilege is to destroy the systems that created it. 2 years later, Sarah Chin stood at the entrance gate of the same estate where her journey had begun, not as a discarded wife clutching a suitcase, but as the director of the Elena Rodriguez Foundation, here to deliver justice to the family that had tried to destroy her. The Blackwood estate was being auctioned to satisfy court judgments, its proceeds designated for victim compensation. Sarah watched as the marble foyer where Margaret had humiliated her was stripped of its imported fixtures, each piece catalogued and valued for families who deserved restitution. "It's strange being back here," Elena said, joining Sarah at the gate. Her sister had completed her undercover assignment and now worked as the foundation's security director, ensuring that recovered assets reached the people they were meant to help. "It's not strange," Sarah replied, feeling none of the pain she'd expected. "It's necessary." Sarah pulled out her tablet, reviewing the list of families who would benefit from the estate sale. Mrs. Patterson will receive enough money to rebuild her life after her husband's pension was stolen. The Rodriguez family can afford medical care for their daughter. The Williams family can send their children to college. Elena smiled, noting how Sarah had transformed from someone who counted other people's money to someone who redistributed it according to principles of justice rather than power. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you about David." Sarah looked up from her tablet. She hadn't spoken to her ex-husband since the trial, where he'd received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony against the network leaders. "He's been calling the foundation office. He wants to make a donation." Sarah considered this information without the emotional turmoil she would have felt 2 years ago. "How much?" "Everything he has left after victim restitution. About $2 million. "And what does he want in return?" "A conversation with you. Just once." Sarah looked at the estate being dismantled around them, thinking about the man who had loved her imperfectly but genuinely, who had betrayed her strategically but suffered consequences for his choices. "Elena, do you think people can actually change?" "I think some people change when they're forced to confront the real cost of their choices. And I think some people were always capable of better, but needed circumstances that made better choices possible." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from their father. Asterisk, the parole hearing went well. "I'll be home next month to help with the foundation's new victim advocacy program. Asterisk. Richard Chen had served 18 months in federal prison before being released to supervised community service. His cooperation had been essential to dismantling the broader trafficking network, and his accounting expertise was now dedicated to ensuring transparency in how recovered assets were distributed. "Elena, do you think Dad has really changed, or is he just adapting to new circumstances?" "I think Dad learned that the power to protect people is more satisfying than the power to exploit them." "But Sarah, the real question is whether you've forgiven him for the choices that put you in danger." Sarah considered her relationship with her father, complicated, loving, built on accountability rather than blind loyalty. "I've forgiven him for being human. I haven't forgiven the system that made his choices seem necessary." Elena nodded, understanding that Sarah's work with the foundation wasn't just about helping individual victims. It was about changing the structures that created victims in the first place. "Sarah, the foundation has received an interesting request." "What kind of request?" "The Department of Justice wants us to consult on legislation that would make financial crimes against families federal trafficking offenses. Your testimony about the connection between economic abuse and human trafficking is being used to rewrite how prosecutors approach these cases." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. So the legal system is actually changing to protect people instead of just punishing them after they've been hurt. Your legal system is changing because victims like you refuse to stay silent and advocates like you are making sure that change serves justice instead of convenience. Sarah looked around the estate one more time, then walked toward the car where David was waiting to have the conversation Elena had arranged. He looked different, not just older, but humbled in a way that suggested genuine transformation rather than strategic positioning. The confidence that had once attracted Sarah had been replaced by something more authentic and more vulnerable. "Sarah, thank you for seeing me." "David, Elena said you want to make a donation to the foundation." "I want to do more than that. I want to work for the foundation, if you'll have me." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving motivation. "David, why would you want to work for an organization dedicated to helping the victims of crimes you participated in?" "Because I want to spend the rest of my life making amends for choices that hurt people I should have protected." David handed Sarah a thick folder. "These are financial records from my family's business operations that weren't included in the federal investigation. Companies in other cities, international accounts, connections to trafficking networks that are still operating." Sarah opened the folder, quickly recognizing the significance of what David was providing. "David, this evidence could reopen investigations in dozens of jurisdictions." "That's what I'm hoping." "Sarah, I can't undo the damage my family caused, but I can make sure that every network connection is exposed and dismantled." "And you're willing to face additional prosecution if these records implicate you in other crimes?" "I'm willing to face whatever consequences are necessary to make sure no one else goes through what you did." Sarah looked at the man she'd married, believing he was someone completely different. "David, I need you to understand something. If you work for the foundation, it won't be because I've forgiven you or because we're rebuilding our relationship. It will be because the work is more important than our personal history." "I understand." "Sarah, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to be useful to people who deserve better than what my family gave them." Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. "David, the foundation needs someone who understands how these networks operate from the inside. If you're serious about making amends, we can use your expertise." "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to prove that people can choose justice over self-interest, even when it's difficult and unrewarding." As Sarah, Elena, and David left the Blackwood estate for the last time, Sarah realized that her journey from victim to advocate had required not just her own transformation, but the transformation of everyone around her. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a congressional committee tasked with rewriting federal laws around organized financial crimes. The same woman who had once sat crying beside the road with nothing but a suitcase was now testifying about legislation that would protect thousands of families from economic exploitation. Committee members, the Elena Rodriguez Foundation has documented over 800 cases of families who were systematically destroyed through financial manipulation designed to facilitate trafficking and abuse. Current laws treat these crimes as separate offenses, but our research demonstrates that they're components of coordinated criminal enterprises. Sarah displayed charts showing the connection between financial abuse and human trafficking. When families are stripped of economic resources through fraudulent legal proceedings, the victims become vulnerable to trafficking networks that promise financial security in exchange for compliance. The committee chair leaned forward. "Ms. Chun, what specific changes to federal law would most effectively prevent these crimes?" "First, financial abuse within families should be classified as a predicate offense for trafficking charges. Second, assets recovered from these networks should be automatically designated for victim services rather than general government funds. Third, family members who expose organized financial crimes should receive protection and compensation rather than prosecution for their unknowing participation." Sarah thought about the hundreds of families who had contacted the foundation seeking help, about the networks that were still operating in cities where victims had no advocates, about the legal system that was slowly learning to protect people instead of just punishing them after they'd been harmed. Committee members, the most important change would be legislation requiring that any prosecution of organized financial crimes must include funding for victim advocacy and long-term support services. After her testimony, Sarah walked outside the Capitol building and called Elena. "How did it go?" "They're going to pass the legislation." "Elena, in 5 years, families facing financial abuse will have legal protections and support services that didn't exist when we were going through this." "Sarah, that means the foundation has accomplished something that will outlast all of us." Sarah looked at the city where powerful people made decisions that affected millions of lives, understanding that her family's transformation from exploitation to advocacy had created ripple effects that would continue expanding long after she was gone. "Elena, when you first asked me to choose between family protection and justice, did you know it would lead to this?" I knew that you were strong enough to choose justice even when it was costly. I didn't know that your choice would transform how the entire system responds to these crimes. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from their father. Asterisk, the new Victim Advocacy Center opened today. 23 families received help in the first week. Sarah, your work is saving lives. Asterisk. As Sarah walked through the city where her nightmare had begun, she realized that her transformation from victim to advocate hadn't just changed her own life. It had changed the lives of people she would never meet, in places she would never visit, facing challenges she would never fully understand. But most importantly, Sarah had learned that the most powerful response to being destroyed was to make sure the destruction stopped with you. 3 years after sitting broken beside the road, Sarah Chun had become the person she never knew she could be, not in spite of what had happened to her, but because of how she had chosen to respond to it. The foundation that bore her sister's name had helped over 2,000 families rebuild their lives. The legislation Sarah had advocated for had been passed in 37 states. The criminal networks that had once operated with impunity were facing coordinated prosecution across multiple jurisdictions. And Sarah Chun, who had once believed that her value was determined by other people's acceptance, had discovered that her real power came from refusing to accept injustice. As Sarah drove home to the house she shared with Elena, a house purchased with legally earned money and filled with the satisfaction of meaningful work, she passed the same stone bench where her old life had ended. But this time, Sarah didn't stop. She had more important places to be. Because when you've learned to transform suffering into service, every day becomes an opportunity to make the world a little more just than you found it. And sometimes that's the most beautiful ending of all. What did this story teach you about the power of choosing justice over comfort, even when the cost seems impossible to bear? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world. The Elena Rodriguez Foundation continues to operate today, helping families rebuild their lives after economic exploitation and trafficking. If you or someone you know needs support, resources are available through the National Human Trafficking Hotline and local victim advocacy organizations. Sarah Chen's story reminds us that sometimes the most important choice we make isn't about what we gain, but about what we're willing to sacrifice to ensure that others don't suffer as we have. Because true power isn't about controlling others. It's about choosing to use whatever influence we have to create a world where fewer people need protection from the powerful.